Venus in the Signs Intro. Today we're starting a series on Venus in the Signs. Venus is usually described as love, attraction, beauty, and money. That's correct, but incomplete. In a chart, Venus shows how you relate to what you want. It describes your instinct for connection, your taste, your way of giving and receiving, and the kind of experiences that feel worth having. It also shows how you handle pleasure, how you attach value to people and things, and how easily you allow yourself to enjoy what is already available. This is why Venus is not only about relationships. It's about preference. It's about selection. It's about what you move toward and what you quietly reject. Two people can want love, but mean completely different things by it. One may need directness and movement, another needs stability and time. One is drawn to stimulation, another to calm. That difference is not random. Venus explains it. The sign Venus is in shows how that instinct operates. It changes the pace, the tone, and the expectations. Some Venus placements move quickly and lose interest just as fast if there is no response. Others take their time and only open when something proves itself. Some respond to words, others to consistency, others to presence, others to intensity. The same applies to money and value. Venus describes what you consider worth investing in, what you naturally attract, and where you may either overextend or hold back. It often shows where things come easily and where they become complicated because your sense of value is not aligned with reality yet. In the natal chart, the sign gives the style, the house shows the area of life, and the aspects modify how smoothly or intensely Venus operates. So this series focuses on the sign first. We're going to look at how Venus behaves in each sign, how it approaches attraction, what it responds to, what it avoids, and where it tends to create both ease and problems if it's not understood properly. No cliches, no simplified labels, just how the placement actually works. Venus in Cancer. Venus in Cancer does not separate love from feeling safe. This is a moon-ruled Venus, which means attraction is tied to emotion, memory, and sensitivity. It's not just about who you like. It's about how something feels inside you, whether you can relax, whether your guard comes down, whether your system trusts what is happening. If that is not there, nothing else really matters. This placement is not impressed by performance. It is not particularly interested in charm that feels rehearsed, attention that comes and goes, or connections that stay on the surface. Venus in Cancer is looking for something that feels real enough to hold. And that word matters here, hold, because this placement experiences connection as something that either contains you or leaves you exposed. There is not much neutral ground. So when Venus in Cancer is attracted, it often happens quietly at first. It watches, it feels, it notices how you respond, not just what you say. Are you consistent? Are you kind without needing credit? Do you pay attention? Do you remember small things? Do you create ease, or do you create tension? These details matter more than big gestures. Now, this is a placement that bonds through care, not in a performative way, but in a practical, emotional way. Checking in, being there, remembering what matters to you, making space, protecting the connection. Affection here is often expressed through nurturing, and that can look different depending on the person. For some, it is emotional support. For others, it is physical closeness. For others, it is creating a shared environment that feels safe and familiar. But the intention is the same, to create something that feels like home. Now, this is where things get more complex, because Venus in Cancer does not just want connection. It wants emotional security, and that means unpredictability can be difficult. If the other person is inconsistent, distant, or unclear, this placement feels it strongly. Not always visibly, but internally. There can be a tendency to withdraw, to protect, to become more cautious. Not because the feelings are weak, because they are strong. And that strength needs protection. This is why Venus in Cancer can take time to open. Once it does, it gives a lot. But before that, there is a testing phase. Not in a manipulative way. More like a quiet observation. Can I trust this? Is this safe to invest in? Is this person going to stay or disappear when things become real? Now, one of the strengths of this placement is emotional intelligence. Venus in Cancer often picks up on tone, mood, and subtle changes quickly. It can sense when something is off before it is said. It can read between the lines. It can feel what is not being expressed directly. That makes it very attuned in relationships. But the shadow of that is sensitivity, taking things personally, holding on to emotional impressions, remembering things long after they have passed. This placement does not forget easily, not always in a negative way. It remembers what mattered, but that also means hurt can stay longer than it should. Now, in terms of attraction, Venus in Cancer is usually drawn to warmth, someone who feels kind, someone who feels emotionally available, someone who does not treat closeness as a game. There is often a preference for familiarity over novelty. This placement is not necessarily looking for the most exciting person in the room. It is looking for the person who feels safe to be around. That does not mean dull. It means grounded. Now, let's talk about how this placement shows affection in real life. It is not always loud. It is not always direct. Sometimes it is subtle, doing things for you, being present, creating comfort, remembering details, showing up when it matters. It may not always say everything immediately, but it will show it through care. This is also a placement that values emotional reciprocity. It wants to feel that what it gives is received and returned, not necessarily in the same form, but in a real way. If it feels like it is giving more than it is receiving, it becomes protective, not necessarily confrontational. Protective. Now, the humor of Venus in Cancer is quieter, but it is there. Because for all the emotional depth, this placement can sometimes act like it is fine, while clearly not being fine at all. There can be moments where everything is technically okay, but the energy has shifted and Venus in Cancer has already noticed, processed, and stored it. And the other person is still asking, is everything all right? And the answer is yes. But the tone says, we will revisit this internally for the next 3 business days. Now, let's talk about one of the main challenges, attachment. Once Venus in Cancer forms a bond, it can be very strong. Letting go is not easy. Even when something is no longer working, there can be a pull to hold on, to fix, to preserve what was once meaningful. Because this placement does not just connect in the present. It connects through memory, through shared experience, through emotional history. So endings can feel like losing more than just the current situation. They can feel like losing everything that was built. This is where boundaries become important, because care without boundaries becomes self-sacrifice. And Venus in Cancer has to learn that protecting itself is not the same as losing the connection. Now, in long-term relationships, this placement thrives on stability, not boredom, but reliability, knowing where things stand, feeling emotionally supported, having a shared base. It does not need constant novelty. It needs consistency that feels alive, that can be through shared routines, emotional closeness, or simply a sense that the connection is secure. Now, let's bring this into money and value. Venus in Cancer often ties value to security, saving, protecting resources, investing in things that feel safe or meaningful. There can be a strong instinct to build a foundation, not necessarily in a purely financial sense, but in a protective sense. However, the shadow can be emotional spending, using money to create comfort, holding on to things for sentimental reasons, making decisions based on feeling rather than practicality. So again, the lesson is balance. To keep the emotional intelligence, but add clarity. Now, in terms of self-worth, this placement is deeply affected by emotional environment. If the surroundings feel supportive, confidence grows. If the surroundings feel unstable, confidence can drop quickly. So for Venus in Cancer, self-worth is not built in isolation. It is built through safe connection, through environments that allow the person to relax and be themselves. Now, one of the best qualities of this placement is that it creates real bonds, not temporary, not superficial, real. It brings care into relationships. It remembers what matters. It builds something that can last. But when it is not conscious, it can become overly protective, too cautious, too attached, too affected by emotional fluctuations. So the key for Venus in Cancer is not to become less sensitive. It is to become more secure within that sensitivity. To keep the care, but strengthen boundaries. To keep the emotional depth, but not lose perspective. To keep the connection, but not at the cost of self. Because when that happens, this placement becomes one of the most genuinely loving Venus positions. It does not just connect. It holds. And that is something not everyone knows how to do. There is also something very private about Venus in Cancer. Even when this placement feels deeply, it does not always reveal everything immediately. It can be warm, affectionate, and caring, but still guarded. Because vulnerability is not casual here. It means something. This placement does not open just because there is chemistry. It opens when there is trust. And that is an important difference. Because for Venus in Cancer, attraction can happen quickly, but emotional availability moves at a different pace. There can be strong feelings early on, but also hesitation. Not because the connection is not real, because the heart is checking whether it is safe to come forward. And until that answer feels clear, some part of this placement stays protected. Now, another thing to understand about Venus in Cancer is that it often loves through atmosphere. The tone of a connection matters. The emotional texture matters. The environment matters. This placement notices whether something feels soft or harsh, calm or chaotic, warm or cold. And that affects everything. Two people can say the exact same words, and Venus in Cancer will respond differently, depending on how those words land emotionally. That is why this placement can be deeply influenced by mood. Not in a random way, in a responsive way. It takes in the feeling of a situation and reacts from there. So when the atmosphere is caring and steady, Venus in Cancer can be incredibly open, generous, and loving. But when the atmosphere feels tense, dismissive, or emotionally disconnected, it starts to close. Sometimes subtly, sometimes immediately. Now, in love, this placement often values emotional presence more than style. It is less interested in someone who knows how to impress, and more interested in someone who knows how to stay. Someone who is emotionally there. Someone who does not disappear when life becomes inconvenient. Someone who does not make intimacy feel unstable. Because Venus in Cancer is usually not looking for a connection that is only exciting in the beginning. It is looking for something that can actually be lived in. Something that works not just in beautiful moments, but in difficult ones too. And that is why this placement often has a strong instinct for emotional durability. Can this person handle closeness? Can this person handle softness? Can this person handle care without becoming careless with it? These questions are often running quietly in the background. Now let's talk about beauty, because Venus also rules aesthetic preference. Venus in Cancer is often drawn to softness, not necessarily in an obvious or trendy way, more in a way that feels personal, comforting, and emotionally resonant. There can be love for natural textures, sentimental objects, familiar spaces, gentle colors, meaningful details. Things that feel lived in. Things that carry memory. Things that create a sense of emotional warmth. This placement usually does not want beauty that feels cold. It wants beauty that feels human. Beauty that relaxes the nervous system. Beauty that feels safe enough to exhale in. And that can show up not only in personal taste, but also in the way this placement creates space. A home, a room, a conversation, a relationship. There is often an instinct to make things feel softer, kinder, more held. Now, one thing that can be misunderstood about Venus in Cancer is that people often assume softness means weakness. It does not. This placement can be extremely strong, but the strength is protective, not performative. It is the strength to keep caring, the strength to remain emotionally present, the strength to hold people through difficulty, the strength to stay connected to feeling in a world that often rewards detachment. That is real strength. And when Venus in Cancer is healthy, that emotional strength becomes one of its greatest gifts, because it knows how to create closeness without forcing it. It knows how to care without making everything about itself. It knows how to make people feel seen in ways that are quiet, but unforgettable. Now, in conflict, Venus in Cancer usually does not enjoy direct harshness. This placement may avoid confrontation at first, especially if the emotional tone feels too sharp. It may retreat. It may go silent. It may process privately before saying anything. And that can sometimes create confusion because the other person may not realize how much is being felt beneath the surface. But just because Venus in Cancer is quiet does not mean nothing is happening. Usually a lot is happening. This placement is often absorbing, interpreting, remembering, and trying to make emotional sense of the situation before responding. That is why communication is so important here. Not dramatic communication, clear communication, gentle, direct, emotionally honest communication. Because if something is left unclear for too long, Venus in Cancer can start filling in the blanks emotionally. And when that happens, assumptions can become stronger than facts. Now, another shadow pattern can be indirectness. Sometimes this placement wants the other person to notice what it feels without having to say it out loud. It wants to be understood intuitively. And while that desire makes sense, it can also create disappointment. Because even caring people are not mind readers. So one of the lessons for Venus in Cancer is learning that expressing a need does not make the need less valid. Saying what you feel is not the same as being too much. Asking for reassurance is not weakness. Clarifying what matters to you is not a burden. In fact, it protects the relationship from unnecessary distance. Now, in terms of dating, Venus in Cancer is often more interested in emotional quality than speed. This placement may not rush, or if it does rush emotionally, it still needs time to truly feel settled. There is usually a desire to know what the connection actually is, where it is going, whether there is sincerity behind it.